She dropped me off at a nursing home on a Thursday morning like she was returning a library book, smiled at the front desk, shook the nurse's hand, kissed my cheek. And then she walked out to her car where my son was waiting, engine already running. They had a flight to catch, a resort booked in Cabo, a whole vacation planned, just the two of them and the kids. I had raised that man from nothing. I had funded the business he put his name on. And neither one of them knew that by the time their plane landed, I had already started taking it back.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want you to picture a Thursday morning in Houston in late July. It is already 84 degrees by 8 a.m. The air is thick and wet the way it gets down here in the summer, where you step outside and the heat just leans on you. My apartment on Alameda smells like the dark roast I make every morning. 2 scoops, no sugar, the way my late husband Leland taught me before he passed. And I've been up since 6:30 getting ready. I am dressed, navy linen pants, a cream blouse, my good sandals. My overnight bag is packed and sitting by the door. It is not a big bag. I do not need much. I have an extra set of clothes, my blood pressure medication, my tablet in its case, my reading glasses, my phone charger. Everything organized the way I have always organized things, by priority, by weight, by what I would reach for first. On the wall by the door, there is a photo from Damon's college graduation. 22 years old, cap and gown, grinning like he just invented success. I am standing next to him in a yellow dress I saved up 3 weeks to buy because I wanted to look like what I felt. Proud. His father had been gone 4 years by then. It was just us. It had been just us for a long time. I remember looking at that photo that morning and thinking, it is good to have something to show for the hard years. I did not hear anything wrong in the silence. I did not feel anything coming. I checked the time. Damon had said 9 o'clock. I called down to Henry at the front desk to let him know someone was picking me up, that I would be gone about a week. Henry said, "Yes, ma'am, have a nice time." I turned off the coffee maker, double-checked the stove, tucked my keys into my purse. At 9:02, my phone buzzed. Damon, here. I took my bag and went downstairs. The first thing I noticed was that Renee did not get out of the car. She was in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, phone in her hand. She did not look up when I came through the lobby door. Damon was standing by the back of the SUV. He gave me a hug, one of those side hugs, arm around the shoulder, quick, and took my bag without me asking. The second thing I noticed was that Marcus and Jade were not in the car. I said, "Where are the kids?" Damon said, "They went ahead with Renee's sister." He did not look at me when he said it. I got in the back seat. Renee turned around and said, "Good morning, Vivienne," in the tone she uses when she has already decided how a conversation is going to go. I said, "Good morning." She turned back to her phone. Damon got in and started the car, and for a few minutes I told myself it was fine. People run late, plans change. Maybe the kids were already at the airport. Maybe there was a reason. But we turned left out of my complex instead of right. The highway to Hobby Airport is to the right. I watched the street signs and said nothing and waited. He drove for about 12 minutes before I said anything. I said, "Damon, this isn't the way to the airport." He said, "I know, just that. I know." Renee was very still in the front seat, the kind of still that means someone has been rehearsed. I watched the back of my son's head and waited. He adjusted the rearview mirror. He did that thing he has done since he was a teenager. When he is uncomfortable, he finds something to adjust, something to look at that is not the person he owes an answer to. He said, "Mom, we need to talk to you about the trip." I said, "All right." He said, "Things have gotten a little complicated." He said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite. "Things have been decided, and now we are just managing how you find out." He said Renee had been worried. He said the kids had a full schedule of activities, and it was going to be a lot of movement, a lot of keeping up. He said the heat in Cabo was different from Houston heat. He said Dr. Ellison had mentioned at my last appointment. And here's where Renee turned slightly in her seat, just slightly, ready, that my blood pressure readings had been inconsistent. I said, "My blood pressure is managed, has been for 6 years." He said, "We know, but..." "There is always a but." He said there was a place, a nice place, just for the week. Good staff, activities, meals cooked fresh. He said he had looked into it personally. He said it had 4.8 stars on Google. I said, "What kind of place?" He said, "It's called Meadow Creek. It's a senior living community." Renee said, "It's beautiful, actually. Very peaceful." I looked out the window. We were on the Southwest Freeway. A billboard for a personal injury attorney slid past. A truck carrying landscaping equipment. I said, "So there is no trip." Damon said, "There is a trip. This is better for everyone, Mom. Just 1 week. You'll have everything you need." I said, "I packed for a beach." He said, "I know." He said it quietly, like a man who knows he has already done the thing he cannot take back. Renee said nothing. I did not cry. I have not cried in front of my son since Leland's funeral, and I was not about to start in the back of his leased Cadillac on the Southwest Freeway. I looked at the road ahead and I thought, clearly and without drama, all right, this is what it is. Now, let's see what comes next. The sign out front said Meadow Creek Senior, living in green cursive on a white stone pillar. There were flower beds on either side of the entrance, yellow and white, freshly watered. A sprinkler was running somewhere off to the left. It was manicured in the way that places are manicured when they want you to see the effort. The lobby smelled like lavender and institutional floor wax, which is a combination that means someone chose the lavender specifically to cover the floor wax. A woman named Sandra met us at the front desk. She was cheerful and efficient, the kind of cheerful that comes from doing this intake 100 times. She shook my hand and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, we are so happy to have you." She had a folder ready with my name on a tab. I noticed the folder. That folder did not get prepared that morning. That folder existed before this morning. I thought about that while Damon talked to Sandra and signed things and nodded. He signed things. I watched him sign things with my name attached to them, and I understood, not for the first time, but finally clearly, that this had been planned for a while, that the family trip to Cabo was real, that I had never been part of it. Sandra showed me to my room. Damon carried my bag. The room was on the second floor, east-facing, a window that looked out over the flower beds and a small courtyard. It was clean. Single bed with a blue and white quilt, a small dresser, a chair by the window, a television mounted to the wall. Damon set my bag down and said, "It's nice, right?" He said it hopefully, like a child who wants credit for something they know was wrong. I said, "It is fine." He hugged me. He said he would call when they landed. He said 1 week would go by fast. He kissed my forehead. I let him. And then he walked out. And I heard his footsteps down the hall, and then the sound of the elevator, and then nothing. I stood by the window and watched the courtyard. A woman was sitting in a chair near a small fountain, white-haired, maybe late 70s, looking at nothing in particular with the practiced patience of someone who has stopped waiting for a specific thing. I watched her for a moment. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Young lady." I turned around. In the doorway stood a woman with silver braids pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a cup of something hot in her hand. She was maybe 78, maybe older. Sharp eyes. She said, "First day?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm Eloise. I've been here 3 years." She said it the way people say things they have made their peace with, but only barely. I said, "I'm Vivienne." She said, "You got that look like you're already calculating." I looked at her and said, "Last day, actually." She raised her eyebrows. She said, "All right then." She handed me her cup, chamomile tea still warm. She said, Sandra keeps the Wi-Fi password on a sticky note behind the desk, left side, under the stapler. She said it like she was sharing something she had been saving. Then she walked back down the hall, unhurried. I sat down in the chair by the window. I took a sip of Eloise's tea. I set it on the sill. Then I opened my purse and took out my phone and sent one email. To Raymond Cole, attorney, the man who had been holding certain documents for me for going on 3 years. 2 words, move forward. Let me tell you who I actually am, because Damon forgot, or maybe he never fully knew. When you become someone's mother, that tends to be the only version of you they see. Before I was his mother, I was Vivienne Oree. I grew up in Acres Homes, Northwest Houston, 4th of 5 children, daughter of a man who drove a city bus and a woman who kept the books for 3 small businesses in the neighborhood, a beauty supply, a barbecue joint, and a dentist's office. My mother never had a degree. She had a calculator, a spiral notebook, and a mind that caught errors the way other people catch colds. I got that from her. I got my accounting degree from Texas Southern and spent 22 years in corporate real estate finance. I structured debt on mid-sized developments, modeled cash flow for mixed-use projects, identified problems in balance sheets that everyone else had certified as clean. I was good at it. I was not famous for it, because I was a Black woman in a field that preferred to make different people famous. But the people who needed to know knew. I met Leland Caldwell at a church picnic in 1986 and married him a year later. We had Damon in 89. Leland drove a delivery truck for a pharmaceutical company. He was funny and warm, and he made biscuits on Sunday mornings that I have never been able to replicate. He died of a heart attack at 51. Damon was 20. After the insurance settled, I had $218,000 and a son with ambition and no money. I could have put that money in savings and retired quietly on it. Instead, I watched Damon for 2 years, watched how he thought, what he read, where he spent his attention, and I saw that he had something real, a feel for what people wanted to build, where they wanted to live, what neighborhoods were about to move. He had Leland's warmth and my eye for numbers, and I thought that is a combination that could do something. So in 2007, when Damon came to me and said he wanted to start a small development company, I sat down with him at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and I said, all right, let's talk about how this actually works. I put in $140,000. I structured the capitalization through a holding entity I formed called VCC Partners. My initials. Damon was the CEO and public face. He was good at that. He could walk into a room and make people want to give him things, which is a real skill and not one I have. I handled the back-end structure, the investor agreements, the compliance framework. In the operating documents, VCC Partners held a 51% controlling interest in Caldwell Property Group. Damon signed those documents at my kitchen table. He was 32 years old, and he trusted me completely, and he did not read them carefully, which I noted at the time but did not correct. A man who starts a company on his mother's money and does not read the capitalization documents is a man who is going to need someone watching out for the structure. That was me. I never told him what I held. There was no reason to. I did not interfere. I attended no meetings, demanded no reports, collected no salary. I let him run the company and I watched it grow, and I was proud of him, genuinely proud. For a long time, he was the man I believed he was. Then, about 2 years before that Thursday morning in July, I started noticing things in the financials that did not line up. The Caldwell Community Housing Fund was a nonprofit attached to the company that I had established in 2015 to support low-income home buyers in Houston. Down payment assistance, credit counseling, that kind of thing. I put $40,000 of my own money into seeding it. Damon had agreed to route 3% of company profits into it annually as a condition of my original investment. The disbursements started getting small, then smaller. Then they stopped appearing in the reports Damon emailed me, the abbreviated ones he sent me twice a year, which I had always read carefully even when he assumed I was just glancing at them. I noted it. I watched for another quarter. Then I called my friend Patricia Okafor and said, I think I need another set of eyes on this. That is where it started. That is where everything started. I want to tell you about the other thing that was happening, the thing that ran alongside the money problem like a second track on the same train. Renee started her campaign about 18 months before they dropped me at Meadow Creek. I did not recognize it as a campaign at first. I thought she was just being Renee, which is to say, self-protective and status-conscious in ways that had always been pointed in my direction. It started small. Damon posted a family photo on his business page, a company anniversary dinner, the whole family out at a nice restaurant. I was there that night. I have pictures from that night on my own phone, but the photo he posted did not include me. It was cropped to just Damon, Renee, Marcus, and Jade. I noticed. I said nothing. Then at church, I attend New Hope Baptist, have for 30 years, I started getting a certain kind of question. Sister Vivienne, how are you doing? But with a specific weight on the doing, the way people ask when they have already been told something. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you sleeping all right? I would say, I'm fine, thank you. And they would nod the way people nod when they believe they know more than you do. My cousin Delphine told me at a birthday dinner after 2 glasses of wine, which is when Delphine tells you things, that Renee had mentioned to someone at a bridal shower that I had been having some trouble keeping track of dates, that I got confused sometimes, that Damon was worried. Damon was not worried. Damon was convenient. Here's the thing about what Renee was doing. It was effective. She was not loud about it. She was not saying, Vivienne is losing her mind. She was just planting a seed, quietly, in the right rooms, with the right sympathetic expression, that I was getting older and things were getting harder for me. So when the time came, if I said something, the ground was already prepared. She had already made me a little bit less believable. I recognized it eventually, but by the time I did, I'd already wasted 6 months on the wrong response. I hired a private investigator named Derek Fontenot, who came well recommended and charged $1,800 up front. I asked him to look into Caldwell Property Group's financials and vendor relationships. He spent 6 weeks on it and came back with a report that it was thin and inconclusive. A few flagged vendors, nothing provable, no smoking gun. I paid him and thanked him and sat with the results and thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the discrepancies are just accounting sloppiness. Maybe I'm seeing patterns that are not there. For about 2 months, I almost let it go. Almost. Then I did what I should have done from the beginning. I called Pat. Patricia Okafor is 71 years old and does not own a single item of clothing that is not some shade of brown or gold. She retired 5 years ago from a 40-year career in forensic accounting, the last 12 of which she spent as an expert witness in financial fraud cases. She has testified in federal court. She has made grown men cry on the stand. She brings her own tea to meetings because she does not trust other people's tea. She is one of 3 people I trust completely. The other 2 are Raymond Cole and now Eloise. I sent Pat the documents I had legal access to as the controlling shareholder through VCC Partners, the operating financials, the vendor ledger, the charity fund disbursements, the tax filings. I told her what Derek had found, which wasn't much, and what I suspected, which was more. Pat took 3 weeks. She called me on a Tuesday evening in March, about 2 months before the Meadow Creek morning, and said, Vivienne, are you sitting down? I was. She said, this is not sloppiness. This is a system. She walked me through it. There was a vendor in the company's books called Summit Advisory Group that had received $412,000 over 5 years for what the invoices described as strategic consulting. Summit Advisory Group had no website, no registered address that tracked to a real office, and no discernible work product in any company file. The invoices were formatted identically, generated from the same template, increasing by 5 to 8% annually. There were also inflated contractor invoices on 3 residential development projects. The inflation was not random. It was consistent, always between 12 and 18% above what comparable projects paid. The overage routed through a holding account that Damon controlled personally. And the Caldwell Community Housing Fund had received $41,000 in total over the past 4 years instead of the 3% of profits it was owed, which, based on the company's growth, should have been closer to $290,000. That money, the difference, had gone somewhere. Pat was still tracing where. I said, "Can you keep going?" She said, "There's one more thing." I said, "Tell me." She said she had found a recurring monthly expense in Damon's personal account. Not the company account, his personal one, which I had limited access to through some old joint account paperwork from when we shared banking years ago. A monthly payment of $2,300, lease payment, to an address in Pearland. She said the utility account for that address was registered to someone named Tanya Briggs. I said, "Who is Tanya Briggs?" Pat said, "I don't know yet, but whoever she is, your son has been paying her rent for at least 22 months. I was in my kitchen when she told me that. I was standing at the counter. I remember putting my hand flat on the countertop and pressing down like I needed to feel something solid. I said, "Okay." Pat said, "Vivienne." I said, "I hear you. Give me a minute." I put the phone down on the counter without hanging up. I walked to the window. I looked out at Alameda Street. It was evening. People walking dogs, a couple at the corner waiting on the bus. Everything ordinary and going on. I thought about Leland, about what he would say. He would probably say something gentle and clarifying that I was too stubborn to hear the first time, and then I would hear it on the 3rd day and wish I had listened sooner. That was usually how it went. I went back to the phone and picked it up. I said, "All right, Pat, keep going, all of it. I want everything you can find." She said, "I figured." She said, "Go make yourself something to eat. You're going to need your strength." Pat found the Tanya Briggs connection on a Thursday. She called me back the following Monday with the rest of it. Tanya Briggs was 36 years old. She was a dental hygienist who worked at a practice in Sugar Land. She had a daughter. The daughter was 3 years old. Pat did not say the obvious thing. She let me sit with the arithmetic. I said, "How long has he known her?" Pat said, based on the lease start date, at least 2.5 years. She said, "I don't know what the relationship is, but the money is real and the timeline is real." I said, "It doesn't matter what the relationship is. What matters is where the money came from." And there was the thing underneath the thing, because 22 months of $2,300 is just over $50,000. That money was not from Damon's salary, which I could account for. That money was coming from somewhere else. And Pat had a strong preliminary case that a portion of it traced back to the Summit Advisory Group payments. My son had built a hidden life on money he had taken from his business, from the company I had started, from a fund I had set up to help people who needed a hand getting into a home. I want to be honest with you about what I felt when I understood that fully. I did not feel rage. I have heard people describe rage as hot, as something that rises. What I felt was the opposite. It went cold and very clear, the way a room gets quiet after a sound stops. Everything settled into its proper place. I walked to my kitchen cabinet and got down the good tea, the loose-leaf rooibos I save for Sundays. I made a full pot. I sat at my kitchen table and drank it slowly, and then I called Raymond. I said, "Raymond, I think it's time to finish the plan." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, I've been sure for 6 months. I was just waiting to see if I was wrong. He said, "You're not wrong." I said, "No, I know." I slept badly my first night. The mattress was fine, better than I expected, but the sounds of the place were wrong. Carts in the hallway, a television somewhere down the hall going too late, a woman coughing at 2 in the morning, steady and distant like a clock. But I did sleep eventually, and when I woke up at 6:30, the room was quiet, and the light through the window was that early pale gold that means the heat hasn't started yet. I lay there for a moment and took stock. My bag was still packed, my tablet was charged. I had the Wi-Fi password Eloise had given me. I had found the sticky note exactly where she said, slipped it into my pocket while Sandra was filing something, copied the password into my notes app, put the sticky note back. I washed up, dressed, and went down to the dining room for breakfast. It was oatmeal with fruit, which was fine, and coffee that was not fine, but was hot. I sat at a table near the window, and Eloise appeared with her own mug about 5 minutes later, set it down across from me, and sat down without asking. I respected that. She said, "How'd you sleep?" I said, "In pieces." She said, "That's about right. Week 2, you'll sleep better. Week 3, you'll realize you're not going home, and that's when it gets hard." I said, "I told you, I'm not staying for week 3. She looked at me over her coffee. She said, "You're not bluffing, are you?" I said, "Eloise, I have never bluffed in my life. I find it inefficient." She almost smiled. She said, "My daughter told me this place was temporary too. That was 38 months ago. I've started crocheting just to have something to do with my hands." I said, "What happened between you and your daughter?" She said, "She got married to a man who wanted her mother-in-law less than he wanted convenience." She said, "And I was easier to move than to stand up to." She wasn't angry when she said it. She had passed through angry a long time ago and come out somewhere else. Not acceptance exactly, more like the clear-eyed recognition of someone who has named what happened to them and decided it will not keep happening. I liked her. After breakfast, I went back to my room, got out my tablet, and connected to the Wi-Fi. I had 7 messages from Raymond, each one a confirmation. He had filed the governance review paperwork under VCC Partners Shareholder Authority late the previous evening. The company's bank had been notified. Credit accounts associated with Caldwell Property Group, as well as the personal accounts Damon maintained through the company's payroll systems, had been flagged for review, meaning his access was suspended pending verification of proper authorization, which, per the operating documents, required my signature. His signature alone was not enough. It never had been. I wrote back, "Proceed to the second notification." Then I set the tablet aside and went to find Eloise to ask if there was a domino set anywhere in this building. There was. We played for 2 hours. She beat me once. I beat her twice. She said I cheated. I said I played by the rules that benefited me, which is not the same as cheating. She said in her experience it was. I thought she was probably right. Raymond Cole is 63 years old, meticulous, and has a small scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident in 1991 that he mentions every few years for no apparent reason. He has been my attorney since 2005. He knows where everything is. He is the only other person, besides Pat, who knows the full architecture of what I built. When I first brought him the VCC Partners documents 3 years ago and told him what I suspected might eventually be necessary, he listened carefully and then said, "Vivienne, do you understand what you're describing?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You are describing a situation where you may have to use your legal authority over your son's company to take control of it away from him." I said, "Yes." He said, "And you've already prepared for that possibility." I said, "I prepared for it because I hoped I would never need to use it. But you make the plan before you need it, not after." Raymond nodded slowly. He said, "All right, let's make it airtight." That is what we had spent 3 years doing. The plan had 4 phases. Phase 1 was financial lockdown. using the VCC partners controlling shareholder authority to suspend Damon's account access pending a governance review. Completely legal. Completely within the rights I had held since the day those documents were signed at my kitchen table. Phase 2 was regulatory notification, submitting the evidence files that Pat had assembled to the IRS and the Texas Secretary of State's office, with accompanying documentation from Raymond laying out the fraud clearly. This was not retaliatory. This was what you do when you have documented evidence of tax fraud, money laundering, and nonprofit fund misappropriation. Phase 3 was the public record. Raymond had a contact at the Houston Chronicle, a business journalist named Angela Moss, who had tried to profile Caldwell Property Group 6 months ago and been given the runaround. We would offer Angela the full story with documents, on background first, and then on record. The story would run when the regulatory filings were confirmed. Phase 4 was ownership transition, a new board for Caldwell Property Group, operating transparently under my oversight, with 50% of my shares transferred to a new senior housing initiative I intended to establish, and scholarship trusts created for Marcus and Jade that would be untouchable regardless of what happened to their parents. I had not activated any of it until that Thursday morning in July, when Damon drove me to Meadow Creek and signed papers with my name on the tab. That was the line. I had told myself for 3 years that if he crossed that line, if he treated me as something disposable, something to be managed rather than respected, then the correction would begin. He crossed it, so it began. He called on Friday afternoon, day 2 of their trip. His voice was easy, relaxed, the voice of a man who has handled a difficult thing and is now on the other side of it, enjoying the sun. He asked how the food was. I said it was fine. He said the resort was beautiful, that the kids were already in the pool, that Renee had found a spa package she liked. I said, that sounds nice. He said, how are the people there? Are they keeping you busy? I said, I've been playing dominoes. He laughed like that was charming. He said, that's great, Mom. See, I told you it would be fine. I said, yes, you did. He said he would call again Sunday. He said, love you. I said, I know, and I hung up. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I called Marcus. Marcus is 16. He is quiet in the way some children are quiet, not because he does not notice things, but because he notices everything and is selective about what he says. He has Leland's eyes and, I think, a little of my mother's way with numbers, though nobody has given him much encouragement in that direction. He answered on the second ring. He said, Grandma? I said, hey, baby, how's Cabo? He said, it's nice. There's a beach. He paused. Then he said, Grandma, I didn't know you weren't coming. Mom told me you decided you didn't want to. I said, what did she say exactly? He said, she said you weren't feeling up to it, that the travel would be too much. I let that sit for a moment. I said, does that sound like me to you? He was quiet. Then he said, no. I said, Marcus, I need you to know something. I'm all right. I'm somewhere safe and I am all right. And things may get complicated in the next few days. If they do, I need you to remember that I love you and that everything I do because it needed to be done. He said, okay. He said it carefully, the way young people say it when they are filing information away. I said, put Jade on for a second. Jade said, Grandma, she has always said my name like it is the beginning of good news. It steadies me every time. I said, Jade, baby, keep drawing. Whatever happens, you keep drawing. She said, I always do. I said, I know. That is why I said it to you. After I hung up, I sat for a while and did not think about anything at all. Sometimes that is the most useful thing. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said, Mrs. Caldwell, this is Deacon Howard Briggs from New Hope Baptist. I believe we may have a common concern regarding your son's foundation account. I've been trying to get answers for 6 months. I did not want to go to the wrong people before talking to someone closer to the situation. If you are willing, I would like to speak with you. I read it twice. Then I typed back, "Call me." He called me within 4 minutes. Deacon Howard Briggs is 65. His voice is careful and measured. The voice of a man who has served a congregation for a long time and learned to say things clearly without saying more than he needs to. He told me he was the treasurer of New Hope Baptist Community Outreach Committee. He said, over the course of 3 years, our congregation donated $32,000 to the Caldwell Community Housing Fund. He said the fund had helped some of our members in earlier years, down payment assistance for 2 families, credit counseling for a few others. He said the congregation had been glad to support it. He said about 14 months ago, the fund stopped sending annual reports. He said he sent 3 letters and made 4 phone calls to the fund's listed administrator, a name he had on file that I recognized as one of Damon's assistants, and received no response. He said, "I am a patient man, but $32,000 is a lot of money for a congregation like ours." And when I started asking around, I heard from another pastor, not from this church, from a congregation out in a leaf, that they had donated to the same fund and had the same experience. No reports, no contact, nothing. He said, "I did not want to call the police or a reporter without speaking to someone in the family first. I felt that was the right way to approach it." He said, "And then this morning, your name and face were everywhere on the news, and I thought, I believe I should call her." I said, "Deacon Briggs, I want you to hear me clearly. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound like a lot, but it is all true, and I need you to hold what I'm sharing with you carefully until the right moment." He said, "I understand." I told him about the fraud investigation. Not everything, not Tanya Briggs, not the personal details, but the financial structure, the missing charitable disbursements, the regulatory filing that Raymond had already submitted. I told him that his documentation, the letters, the phone records, the donation receipts, was exactly the kind of corroborating evidence that would help the case. He said, "You've been building this for a while." I said, "Yes." He said, "And your son just left you in a nursing home." I said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I will send you everything I have, every letter, every receipt, every call log. You do what needs to be done. And if you need someone to testify about the church's experience, you call me." I said, "I appreciate that, Deacon." He said, "We took care of you at New Hope for 30 years, Mrs. Caldwell. You are one of ours. I am sorry we did not pay closer attention sooner." I said, "Deacon, none of this is your fault. My son is a grown man who made his own choices. That is all this is." After I hung up, I sat with the weight of that for a while. $32,000 from a congregation that sang together every Sunday and passed plates and trusted that the money was going where it was supposed to go. My son had taken that money. I thought of my mother keeping the books for that barbecue joint and that beauty supply, never once taking a dollar that wasn't hers. I thought about what she would say about all of this. She would say, "Vivienne, you clean it up. That's what we do." Raymond sent me a message Saturday morning. It said, "Damon's business card declined at the resort's excursion desk. He tried to book a catamaran tour. He called the bank. The bank confirmed accounts are under governance review by VCC Partners. He asked to speak to someone at VCC Partners. There is no one to speak to. VCC Partners is a holding entity, not an office. He has been calling me. I am not answering. He has called me 11 times since 7 a.m. I read the message and set the tablet down. Eloise knocked on my door at 9 to remind me that the domino table in the common room was free before 10, after which a man named Gerald claimed it for checkers and would not give it up for love or money. I went. We played for about an hour. Eloise was better this time. She had figured out that I counted ahead, So she started playing slower, making me wait, breaking my rhythm. I respected it. At 10:15, my phone buzzed on the table. Damon. I watched it ring. Eloise looked at the screen and looked at me. I turned the phone face down. She said, "That him?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You going to answer?" I said, "Not yet." She laid her tiles down. She said, "My daughter called me 100 times the first month I was here." She said, "I answered everyone." She said, "Eventually they stopped calling as much." I said, "This is different." She said, "I know. That's why you should be the one who decides when to answer." Gerald appeared at 9:58 with his checkers board, and Eloise's expression made him sit at a different table. I watched the notification count on my phone climb through the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, I had 14 missed calls from Damon and 2 from a number I didn't recognize that I was fairly certain was Renee calling from someone else's phone. At 4 o'clock, Raymond sent another message. "Hotel has flagged the room. They paid the first night on a card that is now frozen. They have until checkout tomorrow to make other arrangements." I replied, "Understood." Proceed to phase 2 notifications. I made myself walk around the courtyard before dinner. I took the long way, around the fountain, past the flower beds. The woman I had seen on my first day, still sitting in the same chair, same posture, looked up when I walked by. She said, "New?" I said, "Just passing through." She nodded, satisfied. She said, "That's the right way to see it." She called Sunday morning, not from Damon's phone, from her own, which I had not heard from in months. She had that careful, controlled quality in her voice that I recognized from holiday dinners when something had gone sideways and she was trying to hold the frame together. She said, "Vivienne." I said, "Renee." She said, "I think there's been a very serious misunderstanding." I said, "Tell me about it." She said, "Whatever you think is happening with the company, you have to understand that Damon has been under an enormous amount of pressure this year." She said the market had shifted, there were cash flow issues, he had made some decisions that he is prepared to explain. She said everything could be clarified with a conversation, a real conversation, not lawyers and filings. She said, "You know how much we love you." I let that sit there for a moment. I said, "Renee, I want you to think back to about a year and a half ago, to a bridal shower you attended." She was quiet. I said, "I want you to think about a conversation you had there, about me." She said, "Vivienne, I don't know what you're referring to." I said, "I think you do." I said, "I'm not asking you to confess anything right now. I'm just asking you to think about it, and to think about what it means that you tried to make people doubt me before any of this happened." She said, "That is not fair." I said, "I'm not sure fair is the right frame for this conversation. I think accurate is more useful." Then I said, "Renee, I have documentation going back 5 years. I have a forensic accountant who spent 6 weeks on this. I have a regulatory filing already submitted. I have a journalist who has been waiting for a reason to write the story for 6 months. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a correction." She said, "You would do this to your own son?" I said, "My son did this. I'm just making sure the record reflects what actually happened." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "And the children? Have you thought about what this does to Marcus and Jade?" I said, "Yes. I have thought about them every day for 2 years. Have you?" She did not answer. I said, "I'll let you go, Renee. You have some things to figure out, and I think you should figure them out with a lawyer." I hung up. I sat very still for a moment. Outside the window, the sprinklers had come on in the courtyard. The sound was gentle and ordinary and completely indifferent to everything happening inside these walls. I thought, all right, that's done. Then I went to find Eloise and ask if she wanted to take a walk. He called that evening, not from his phone, from an app, so his parents couldn't see the call in the logs. I noticed that. I thought his grandfather would have done exactly the same thing. His voice was low. He was somewhere quieter than the rest of the resort. I could hear faint music and noise in the distance, like he had slipped away from a common area. He said, "Grandma, Dad's been on the phone all day. He's really upset." I said, "I know." He said, "He says the company accounts are frozen." He said, "He's saying it's your fault, that you did something to the accounts." He was trying to keep his voice even and mostly succeeding. I said, "Marcus, I did freeze the accounts. I had the legal right to do it." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because your father has been taking money that didn't belong to him, not just from the company, from a fund I set up to help people buy homes, from donations that people gave, believing they were helping families in need." The line was very quiet. He said, "How long have you known?" "Long?" I said, "About 2 years. I spent most of that time hoping I was wrong, gathering enough to be sure. I wanted to be certain before I did anything." He said, "Dad's been telling people you've been confused, that you've been misremembering things." I said, "I know." He said, "Is that why they put you in that place? So that when this happened, people would already think—" He trailed off. He is 16, and he had just understood something that adults spend years missing. I said, "Yes, sweetheart. I think that was part of it." He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. He said, "Grandma, I heard them talking about you before the trip. Dad said to Mom that they needed to deal with the situation. He was talking about you. He said they had been planning this for a while." I said, "I know." He said, "I didn't say anything, and I should have." I said, "Marcus, you are 16 years old. It was not your job to manage your parents' choices. Do you hear me?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Whatever is about to happen, your job is to take care of yourself and take care of your sister. That's all. Can you do that?" He said, "Yes." He said it quietly but clearly. Then I heard Renee calling his name somewhere in the background, sharp, looking for him. And he said, "I gotta go." He said, "Grandma, I'm glad you're all right." He said, "I'm glad you're not really confused." I said, "Sweetest boy, I have never been confused in my life." He almost laughed, then he was gone. I sat in my room at Meadow Creek and thought about Leland, about how much he would have loved to see the man Marcus was becoming. Monday morning, Raymond filed with the IRS and the Texas Secretary of State's office at 9 a.m. 206 pages of documentation, including Pat's analysis, the vendor records, the charity fund disbursement history, Deacon Briggs's church documentation, and the operating records from VCC Partners, establishing my controlling interest. At 10:17, Angela Moss called Raymond's office. She had received the courtesy copy Raymond sent her Sunday night. Documents on background, not for immediate publication, with an offer to speak with the primary source directly. She called within 12 hours. She is 41, has been at the Chronicle for 11 years, and according to Raymond, is the kind of reporter who reads footnotes. She had tried to profile Caldwell Property Group the previous fall and been given a polished runaround by Damon's communications person. She had been suspicious since then and watching for a reason to dig. Raymond called me and said, "Angela Moss would like to speak with you today. She is thorough, she is fair, and she is going to ask you hard questions. Are you ready?" I said, "Raymond, I've been ready for 2 years." He said, "I know. I just wanted to hear you say it." Angela and I spoke for 90 minutes that afternoon by phone. She had already read the documents Raymond sent. She had questions, real questions, not soft ones. She wanted to understand the corporate structure, the VCC Partners holding arrangement, why I had not moved sooner, what I believed Damon's primary motive was, whether I had any concern that my own delay in acting made me partially responsible for the ongoing harm. That last question was a good question. I told her so. I said, yes. I asked myself that. My answer is that I spent 2 years hoping I was wrong, because he is my son, and that instinct does not go away. But I also know that the moment I was certain, and I have been certain for about 8 months. I began moving. I did not move faster because I needed the documentation to be airtight. If I had moved too early with incomplete evidence, he could have challenged it, and the people who were harmed might have gotten nothing. She said, "And what was the final trigger? Why now?" I said, "He put me in a nursing home so that his wife could go to Cabo without me." A pause. She said, "He left you there?" I said, "Yes," with a suitcase I had packed for the beach. She said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I would like to run this story as soon as the regulatory filings are confirmed." I said, "Miss Moss, run whatever is true. That has always been my only condition." Angela Moss wanted photos. Raymond arranged a car to take me from Meadow Creek to the Chronicle's offices Tuesday morning, but I decided to do the formal interview the night before, by phone, from my room at Meadow Creek. This was a choice I made deliberately. I wanted the first images associated with the story to show where I was, where Damon had left me, not to be dramatic about it. Because accuracy mattered. Because the fact of where I was sitting when I set all of this in motion was part of what needed to be understood. We started at 7 p.m. At 7:43, my tablet died. I had a full charge. I had the notes I needed open on the screen: names, dates, document reference numbers. When the screen went dark, I felt the particular frustration of a plan that was going correctly suddenly developing a small, stupid complication. The nursing home's charging cart, where residents could charge their devices, was locked until 7 a.m. I told Angela I needed 10 minutes. I sat and I reconstructed from memory the dates and figures I needed. I know those numbers the way musicians know their scales, the way my mother knew every entry in those spiral notebooks. It took me 7 minutes to feel confident I had it right. I called Angela back and said, "I apologize for that." She said, "Don't." She said, "For what it's worth, you just demonstrated that you are not confused about anything." We finished the interview at 9:15. I plugged my phone charger into the outlet by my bed. At least that was working. And I sat by the window in the dark and let myself feel tired for a few minutes. Not defeated, just tired, the way you get when you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and you can finally see the place where you get to set it down. Eloise knocked at 9:30. She slid a piece of paper under the door. I picked it up. It said, in her handwriting, "I saw you on the news. You held up fine. Go to sleep." I folded it and put it in my overnight bag. I went to sleep. Raymond's car came for me at 6:45 Wednesday morning. I was packed and ready by 6:30. I took one last look at the small room with its blue and white quilt and its window facing the courtyard. Eloise was already in the hall. I do not know if she got up early or simply did not sleep. She said, "You did what you came to do." I said, "I did not come here willingly." She said, "No, but you didn't waste the time either." I hugged her. She was smaller than I expected. People who take up large space in a room often are. I told her I would be back. She said she would believe that when she saw it. I said she was right to hold off believing things until there was evidence. She almost smiled. I was in Raymond's office by 7:30. Damon arrived at Meadow Creek at 10. I know this because Eloise called me at 11:15 to report. She said he came through the front door fast, asking for his mother. She said the woman at the front desk told him I had been discharged that morning. She said he did not take that well. She said he got loud, not violent, just loud, the way men get when they are scared and trying to cover it with noise. She said Linda, the floor supervisor, came out from the back, and she said Linda, and I want you to know I would not have predicted this, told Damon plainly that he should be ashamed of himself. She said Linda told him that she had met a lot of families in her years working in senior care, and that she could always tell which ones brought their parents in out of necessity and which ones brought them in out of convenience. She said Linda told him he looked like a convenience case. Eloise said, "He left pale as oatmeal." I thanked her. She told me to win. I said, "It's not about winning." She said, "I know, but win anyway." Raymond had prepared the documents carefully. We sat in his conference room, Raymond, Pat, his assistant, and me, and I signed the papers that made the change official. VCC Partners formally exercised its authority as controlling shareholder of Caldwell Property Group. A new board of 3 people was appointed. A real estate attorney I had worked with decades ago, a woman who had run a nonprofit housing organization in Houston for 12 years, and Pat, who accepted on the condition that she would not attend any meeting that served bad coffee. 50% of my shares in the company were transferred to the Vivienne Oree Caldwell Foundation, which would operate as the managing entity for the senior housing initiative I had been planning. It would start with 2 properties in Houston, one to be built on a site in the 3rd Ward near where I grew up. Scholarship trusts for Marcus and Jade were established that afternoon. The trusts were structured to be independent of their parents' financial situations and legal proceedings. Whatever happened to Damon and Renee, those trusts would stand. Pat poured herself a coffee from Raymond's machine, tasted it, and said, "This is unacceptable." Raymond looked chastened and offered to send someone for better coffee. We sat around that conference table for a few hours and handled the practical machinery of the plan, the part that is not cinematic, that does not make for interesting storytelling, but that is where the real work is, going through documents line by line, confirming approvals, verifying registration numbers. This is what I know how to do. I have known how to do it my whole life. There is a particular satisfaction in competence. It is quieter than winning. It lasts longer. I thought about my mother with her spiral notebooks and her calculator, keeping every number straight in every column for businesses that depended on her, and I thought she would understand exactly what today was. I did not go inside. I sat in Raymond's car in the parking garage of the Harris County Criminal Justice Center with a cup of coffee from a place around the corner. Dark roast, exactly right. And I waited. Marcus and Jade were with me. Marcus had asked to come the night before. Jade had asked Marcus if she could come with him. Damon's arraignment was on the 3rd floor. Raymond was inside. Marcus was in the back seat next to Jade. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking out the window at the garage wall. Jade said, "Grandma, do you think he knew what he was doing was wrong? Or did he just stop thinking about it?" I said, "I think he knew. I think he told himself enough stories about why it was justified that eventually he stopped questioning it. That happens to people." Marcus said, "That could happen to anyone, right? That's the scary part." I said, "Yes, that is exactly the scary part." He said, "How do you make sure it doesn't happen to you?" I thought about that. I said, "You pay attention to the moments when you want to look away. Those are the moments that matter. When you catch yourself not wanting to look at something directly, that is when you look at it the hardest." He thought about that for a while. Jade said, "What about Mom?" I said, "What about her?" She said, "Is she in trouble too?" I said, "That depends on what she chooses to do from here. She has an opportunity to do the right thing. Whether she takes it is up to her." Jade nodded slowly. She said, "She called me last night." I said, "What did she say?" She said she was sorry. She said she had made some bad choices. She said she was crying. She said she had never heard her mother cry like that before. I let that settle. I said, "How did that make you feel?" Jade said, "Sad. And also like she should have cried a long time ago." That afternoon, the Chronicle's story went online. Retired Houston accountant reveals she holds controlling interest in son's firm, alleges fraud and charity misappropriation, by Angela Moss. It ran with a photograph of me that Angela's photographer had taken the previous morning, outside Raymond's office building. Silver-haired, navy blazer, looking directly into the camera. Not fierce, not dramatic, just present. The follow-up piece ran that evening. Caldwell Company Records. Reveal additional account holder. Undisclosed lease in Pearland. That was the one about Tanya Briggs. I had not given that information to Angela. She had found it independently through the regulatory filings, which are public record. I read it in the car, parked in that garage, while Marcus and Jade were quiet beside me. I put my phone in my purse when I was done reading. I said, "Are you too hungry?" Marcus said, "A little." I said, "Let's get something to eat, and then we are going to go home." My apartment on Alameda is smaller with 2 teenagers in it. Marcus sleeps in the second bedroom. Jade has claimed a corner of the living room for her drawing. She brought a folding table from Renee's sister's garage and set it up by the window, and it is now covered in sketchbooks and art markers and a small jar of pencils that she has organized by color in a way that I find genuinely satisfying to look at. The first week was hard. They had not packed for more than a few days. We made a run to Target on a Saturday morning that took 2 hours because Jade had opinions about everything, and Marcus had opinions about nothing, and somehow that combination still takes 2 hours at Target. The company stabilized within the first month. The new board met twice and made sensible decisions. The Senior Housing Initiative broke ground on the 3rd Ward property in mid-September. A quiet ceremony, just a handful of people, a few shovels, the kind of beginning that does not look like much but is. Eloise is on the advisory board for the initiative. I called her 2 weeks after leaving Meadow Creek and asked if she would be willing. She said she had been waiting for someone to ask her to do something useful since the Clinton administration. She drives herself to meetings in a 1999 Buick that I do not ask about. Deacon Briggs' congregation received a full restitution payment from the company's estate in October. $32,000 plus interest. He called to tell me. He said, "The congregation is going to pray for you, Mrs. Caldwell." I said, "Deacon, I could use it." Renee cooperated with the investigation fully. She provided the investigators with information about 3 transactions that even Pat had not fully traced, 2 of which involved a city council member who had been quietly steering contracts toward Caldwell Property Group in exchange for payments routed through Summit Advisory Group. Those are separate proceedings now. Renee entered into a cooperation agreement and is expected to receive a reduced sentence. She is studying psychology at a community college downtown. I know this because Marcus told me. I do not know how I feel about it yet, and I have decided that not knowing is all right. Damon is serving his sentence at a federal facility in Beaumont. He will be there for some time. I visited him once. He was thinner than I had seen him in years. The prison jumpsuit makes everyone look wrong, like a costume designed to flatten you. He looked flat. We sat across from each other at a table in the visitation room. He said, "Mom." I said, "Damon." He said, "I didn't think you would come." I said, "I almost didn't." He said, "I'm sorry." He said it plainly, without decoration, which was the most honest I had heard him in a long time. I said, "I know." I said, "What hurts me most is not the money. It is not even the nursing home. What hurts me most is that you saw me as something that could be managed, as a problem to be solved. You forgot who I was before I was your mother." He looked at the table. He said, "I know." I said, "Do you know when you stopped?" He said, "No." He said, "I think I just got busy, and then I got greedy, and it became easier to stop thinking about certain things." I said, "Yes, that is exactly what happened." We sat in silence for a while. Not a comfortable silence, but not a hostile one either. The silence of 2 people who have a long, complicated history and are finding out what is left of it. He said, "Are the kids all right?" I said, "They are. They are remarkable." He said, "That's mostly you." I said, "That is all of us, including you, before you forgot who you were trying to be." I stood to leave. He said, "Mom, do you think you can ever forgive me?" I said, "Damon, I am 68 years old. I have survived losing your father. I have survived building a company from nothing while the world told me I was not the face they were looking for. I have survived being dropped at a nursing home with a suitcase packed for the beach. I will survive figuring out what forgiveness means for this. He said, "Is that a yes?" I said, "It is a not yet," which is different from a no. I drove home along the Southwest Freeway, the same road he had taken me on that Thursday morning in July. Different direction now. Pat comes on Fridays. We eat and argue and, more often than not, end up laughing at something that is probably not funny, but is somehow funny anyway. She still brings her own tea. Angela Moss published a longer follow-up piece last month about the senior housing initiative and about what the Caldwell case had surfaced more broadly, a pattern of financial fraud in nonprofit housing funds across the city that investigators were now looking into. She thanked me in the author's note for speaking clearly and on the record. I emailed her and said, "That is the only way I know how to speak. Marcus starts at Rice next fall. He got in on his own. I did not call anyone. I did not leverage anything. He applied and he got in. I cried when he told me, not because I was surprised, but because sometimes the thing you hoped for happens, and when it does, you cry. Jade is 13 and already talking about architecture school. She draws buildings the way other people breathe, naturally without effort, as if the shapes were already there, and she is just reporting what she sees. Last week she showed me a sketch she did of a senior housing complex. She had given it a courtyard with a fountain and flower beds along the edges. She said, "I was thinking about what Meadow Creek could have been, if someone had done it right." I looked at the drawing for a long time. I said, "Baby, you are going to do it right." She said, "I know." She said it without arrogance, just certainty, the quiet kind. I have started writing, not a book, not yet, just notes. Things I want the grandchildren to have someday, what my mother taught me, what the numbers taught me, what my son taught me, which is different from what I wanted to teach him, and which I will have to reckon with for the rest of my life. Here is what I know. Age does not take your mind. It focuses it. Everything unnecessary falls away, and what remains is what always mattered. The people you kept safe, the problems you actually solved, the moments when you chose truth over convenience, and it cost you something real. I am not someone's problem. I am not a situation to be managed. I am not a woman who goes quietly anywhere. I am Vivienne Oree Caldwell. I am 68 years old. I built something from nothing with my mother's mind and my husband's faith and my own 2 hands. I waited patiently for 2 years, and then I took it back. I am not done. I am just beginning again. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.